Welcome to Professionally Speaking TV. I'm Randall Craig, your host, and I'm here today with Jill Donahue. Jill is the founder of Accelerate and also the founder of an interesting charity called Bricks and Books. We've got her in the studio today. Jill, welcome, and tell me, how did you get into this and where does Accelerate come from?
Thanks, Randall. Thanks for inviting me today. Well, the story goes that my passion has always been how to influence behavior change. So my undergraduate degree was in psychology. I thought I was going to become a psychologist, and then became much more interested in working after my first degree and found myself in the pharmaceutical arena, where I went out and I helped educate physicians on how to use the products that our company had.
Now, was this a sales role primarily?
That's right. Yeah, a rep.
Okay.
I carried the bag, as they say.
You carried the bag.
Yeah, carried the bag, and then found a department that I found really interesting called continuing health education. And that's an area where we would find out the educational needs of the physicians and create tools to help them treat their patients better. So I was very busy in that area, and then I became frustrated with why weren't the physicians changing their behavior? And I started researching it. And I was very lucky that my director encouraged that, because then I would present that research nationally and internationally, and I won some awards for it, and it became my thing. That's what I love to do. Eventually, I decided I might as well get some letters behind my name, so I completed my master's degree in adult education with a focus on influencing healthcare behavior change.
Okay.
And then I realized that people were really interested in what I had to say. So about 6 years ago, I broke the golden handcuffs and left pharma, went out on my own and started speaking. And I'll get goosebumps when I saw the audience have light bulbs turn on.
Okay, so you speak primarily to folks primarily doctors?
I do speak to doctors, so I'll speak to doctors about how to influence better patient outcomes, because 50 to 75% of patients don't adhere to the medication they're on. So I talk to doctors about how to get better adherence from their patients. I speak to doctors who teach other doctors about how to engage their audiences, so it's not a dry, dull academic talk. And then I also work a lot with pharma companies, so all associates within the pharma area, about how to influence ethically, with a big emphasis on the ethical part.
Okay, we'll talk about ethics later on. Thinking back to your time, and you were at Aventis, I believe,
yeah,
for a number of years. What are some of the techniques that you used back then to educate the doctors? And was it different, doctors compared to other people?
Great question.
Give me an example of one of the techniques that you'd use.
Well, things that we did back in the day, pharma has undergone a lot of changes, and things that we did back in the day included weekend seminars or dinner programs, lunch and learns. We would bring a group of doctors together and they would go through a workshop or a lecture by an expert speaker, by an expert doctor.
Yes.
Sorry?
And oftentimes when you bring people away for the weekend, there'd be one little educational thing and the rest was vacation?
Well, there was a certain amount. There was 8 hours of education, and then there was social time as well. That doesn't happen anymore with companies that are abiding by the rules and regulations.
Okay.
Things have changed significantly.
Okay.
What would happen was there was a bigger emphasis on the activity instead of the education. And so I'll give you an example. I was really frustrated. I had developed this workshop on managing stroke, and I knew that it was going to improve lives, save lives, as well as be good for our company, because our product was to be used to help save these lives.
Yes.
So it was a win-win-win. And so I developed the program. I was doing my master's at the time, so I included all the adult education principles. It was an excellent program. So I sent it out to the reps across the company, across the country, and said, be free, go, invite doctors, have fun. They came back to me and said, no, no one's interested.
So there's a problem and there's a problem with influence with you and the reps, obviously.
That's right, exactly, it's everywhere. So they said to me, we need more money so that we can take them to the theater and then give them this program. And I was frustrated with that, because it's not about just getting them to the program. It's about them learning from the program. And if they're there just because they want to see the theater, it's not going to work. So I started, that was one of my research projects, where I thought we have to inspire the doctor, influence the doctor to want to attend. So I created a disorienting dilemma, as Mesro would call it, where we gave them some questions that I knew that they would get half right and half wrong, and measure their change in interest in attending the workshop before they had those stimulating questions and then after. And 115 out of 125 of them increased their interest in attending that workshop.
Just based on the questions?
Just based on those questions. Just something to stimulate their interest. So it's research like this that got me really excited, that there are things that we can do to move people up the staircase of behavior change.
So talk a little bit more about disorienting questions and how one can use that. We've got a business audience listening to us right now. Maybe they're looking to sell whatever it is to somebody. Is there a certain formula for coming up with these disorienting questions?
Well, I don't know about a formula.
Is there an approach?
An approach, I'd say. Creating disorienting dilemmas, I could do a whole workshop on that. It is a really good one because that's the first step. There are 5 steps of behavior change. And on that first step, someone's uninterested. They don't want to even think about whatever it is that you have to tell me about. And then something happens. There's a trigger called disorienting dilemma. That makes me go, oh, okay, I'm still not ready to buy or do whatever you said, but now I'm leaning in. So disorienting dilemma could be, if you were a public speaker, I could say, do you know what the biggest mistake is that 95% of people are making out there?
Since I am a professional speaker,
You're
I could
sort of
probably
intrigued.
answer it. Yes,
Yeah.
okay, fine. So,
Yeah.
okay, so fine, you come up with should you be asking one of them or should there be a handful?
I would suggest a handful because what works for you might not work for the person beside you or the next person. So when people are creating these disorienting dilemmas, a great thing to do is to find out what the audience does right, what they don't do right. Find things that know your audience, and then create questions. It doesn't have to always be questions. It could be a crossword puzzle. It could be a statement. It could be a testimonial. It could be a picture. Something that makes them lean in and go, oh, I want to know more.
Now, this is a very interesting irony because you've got to do some market research, some homework to determine what the disorienting question situation might actually be.
Yes.
Which means, of course, you've got to first ask orienting questions before you do the disorientation.
Right. You need to know your audience well.
Sure.
And that's why I always recommend that people do that needs assessment ahead of time. Do interviews with their target audience that they're trying to influence. Whether it's an audience of one or many, know your audience. And then also a great strategy to create these is to brainstorm with other people, to try them out, have that handful, share successes. When I work with teams of people, sales teams, for example, I'll advise them to share their successes. What worked with what type of audience member. And then they have a collection of them, like you said, a handful instead of just one.
Okay, wonderful. You gave us the teaser. 5 steps. First one, disorienting questions.
Yep.
What's number 2?
So that is if you picture a staircase, there's 5 steps. And people that are familiar with Prochaska's trans-theoretical model behavior change, this will sound familiar. But the bottom step, I'll call that uninterested. And if we picture, everyone knows someone who's a smoker, right? So picture someone you know who is or was a smoker. And the behavior that we're trying to influence is for them to become
a non-smoker.
A non-smoker,
sure.
of course. So let's see how that person goes up the staircase. So on the bottom step, and you know this guy, he's uninterested. I'm a happy smoker. It keeps my weight down. I look cool. I don't believe those studies about that it's bad for my health. Don't even talk to me about quitting smoking. Then something happens, that disorienting dilemma. Let's say that smoker's sister just had a heart attack. She was also a smoker. That smoker now thinks, oh shoot, maybe I'm not genetically immune to the dangers of smoking. They just moved up a step. They're not ready to quit smoking, but now they've moved from uninterested to aware, where now I know there's something here, but there's no way I could do it. So what's really important here for that person is that they hear a testimonial of success. So now that smoker's on that step, and then they find out that their friend Randall had quit. Well, if he can do it, maybe I can do it too.
Yes.
So now he just moved from that step to studying, where now I want to know more about this. I'm still not ready to quit. My importance is going up though, and my confidence is slowly going up. 2 factors that are really key. But now I want to know more. Well, that's how he did it, but maybe I should talk to the hypnotherapist, the acupuncturist, my doctor, the pharmacist. There's something about some gum I could use. And they start to investigate it until they increase their confidence enough that they say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. On August 1st, these are the strategies I'm going to do. I'm going to put the cigarettes down. Now they're on the initiating step, the day they put the cigarettes down. But what is the danger? What can happen on that day?
Oh, obviously. They fall off the wagon.
Yeah, they can tumble right down that staircase at any time. So we need to do things we're on that step. What would help? If you were that smoker, you just put down your cigarettes, what would help?
Not being a smoker ever, I have no idea.
Well,
probably chewing gum.
Yeah, chewing gum, yeah.
I mean, I have no idea.
Well, think about other behaviors that you have tried to change. Might be helpful, for example, if you had a friend that called you every night. Maybe you have posters on the wall. Maybe you wrote a commitment to yourself. Maybe you told all your friends about it to be accountable to them. All these things are called enablers, or reminders. And so we need those in place when that person that you're trying to influence is finally doing it. You can't just go, I did it, they're there.
Yes.
You need to remind and enable them. Until they've been doing that behavior for long enough that the poster falls down, they don't need that friend to call them every night. They finish their course of therapy, their patch is over, they don't need the gum anymore. They move to the final step, which is called on board. And this is where they wouldn't think of going back to that previous behavior.
Yes.
So those are the 5 steps. And if you notice, the first letter of each step spells suasion, with S being step, and then U for uninterested, aware, studying, initiating, and on board, just to try to help people remember it.
Very, very interesting. And is there science behind this that says, yes, it's more likely that if people follow this particular model, that they're likely to be influenced to change?
What I loved when I was doing my master's degree was that I could sit and read everything. And what I found when I went to all the many, many different theorists on behavior change was they all followed this idea of a step-based or stage-based approach. I used words that were meaningful because I tested it out for years with my clients, and I found those words to be meaningful, but you'll find other people using other terms. And that is really what the majority of theorists talk about, that it is a stepwise approach. And we make a huge mistake typically when we attempt to influence on that staircase.
And the mistake being?
Can you guess what it is? Jumping up the staircase. So typically people will say, I've only got 2 minutes with him, right? So picture the pharma rep and the doctor. I've only got, typically it's less than 30 seconds they have. I only have 30 seconds with the doctor.
Yeah, close the sale.
Yeah, I'll go straight to my message. But what happens is you're jumping up 4 steps. And what happens when you try to jump up 4 steps?
Oh, gee,
Up the staircase.
It never works.
Right.
It never works.
You're just going to fall down again. And then the rep says, well, that didn't work. I'll go back and I'll do it again and again and again. And this is why the doctor gets frustrated and gives them less and less time and starts closing that door to the rep. So the more urgent we feel, and speakers do the same thing. They say, I've only got 30 minutes with the audience. I better just tell them what to do.
Whoops.
Right. And I have a perfect example of this because I make these mistakes too. And I don't know if you have children, Randall.
Oh, yes, of course. Yes.
Okay.
So let's hear the mistake.
Yeah, because often our mistakes are where we're most comfortable, at home or at work. And this mistake, the story goes, I was a swimmer. I was a lifeguard. My dad was a lifeguard. I believe it's really important for my kids to learn to swim. So I was going through the leisure guide, which we do as parents every few months to choose the programs for our children to take, right? I was going through the leisure guide, and Andy, my eldest daughter, had just turned 13. So of course it was time for her to take her bronze medallion.
Yes.
Makes perfect sense to you and me, right?
Oh, yes, of course.
So I was going through it, found the listing. At that moment, Andy walked into the house. So I turned to her and said, Andy, bronze medallion, Friday night or Sunday afternoon?
And since you gave her a choice of 2, she chose one of those.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Of course, of course. Yes, teenage daughters.
Yeah, you know them well. So her reaction, of course, was, no way.
I don't think so.
Not doing it. And in that moment, I smiled and I reflected on, I pictured the staircase in my mind and went, I just did it. I just made the biggest mistake that I teach my clients, that my clients make, and I jumped up the staircase. I jumped up to the initiating. What day do you want to do it on? Instead of walking her up the staircase.
Very interesting. And of course, she's got her bronze medallion now?
Well, she does. So what happened was, a couple weeks later, we were in a coffee shop, and the barista was being hassled by the customers. And it was a beautiful sunny day. So I turned to Andy and said, do you want to work inside or outside in the summer? Like when you're getting a summer job, what do you think, inside or outside? And she looked at me. And I said, you know, I met with a client the other day, and of course, disorienting dilemmas have to be completely truthful. Influence is based on trust and on honesty. So I told her about a client of mine who had worked her way through university teaching swimming lessons in her backyard swimming pool. And I could see Andy looking at me. So I knew I was bringing her up the staircase, that this would be a great summer job. But of course, you'd have to have your bronze medallion, was the unspoken thing.
Of course, that's the enabler.
So I saw her leaning in, so I walked up to the next step where I said, you know, I heard that Sam down the street took it. She took her bronze medallion, and she didn't think it was that bad. Now, have you been swimming with Sam before? Do you think she's that much better than you? So I was giving her this testimonial. And then that she was still listening, so I moved up to the next step, studying, where offering her options to learn more. So I said, you know, I think Alex is thinking about taking it, another neighbor. Why don't you talk to Alex about it? And maybe you can read the brochure, what it says. What do you think? So she proceeded to that until she decided she and Alex were going to sign up for it, and they moved up to initiating. At which time I thought I dropped her off to the first swimming lesson, but I wasn't sure yet, so I checked in with her afterwards. You know, how did it go? Well, she didn't have the right bathing suit. She needed a one-piece. You know, I had to do this.
Sure.
And then I was lucky that time because it turns out the instructor was really cute. So it was a done deal. She was, of course, has completed it.
And we all know that if you can sell to your teenage daughter, you can sell to anybody.
Right. And you know, that's a funny thing, Randall. When I do these workshops, whether it's with physicians or pharma associates, some point someone will raise their hand in the room and say, hey, will this stuff work with my teenage son?
That's
or my
right.
wife? Someone else will jump up. So yeah, this applies everywhere, because influence is something we do from the moment we wake up
Sure.
to the moment we go to bed.
That's absolutely true. We're with Jill Donahue of Accelerate. I'm Randall Craig on Professionally Speaking TV. Right after the break, we'll learn a little bit more about how to influence everybody around you and how to do it perhaps a bit more ethically than you could imagine. Back in a few. And we're back on Professionally Speaking TV. I'm Randall Craig, your host. We're with Jill Donahue, who's an expert in influence, and particularly in the pharma industries. Now, I have to ask a question to you, Jill. We just finished a segment where we talked a lot about the staircase and the model and everything, and that assumes that everybody is exactly the same. But you know, people come from different cultures, people are different ages, people have different personal styles.
Yeah.
How much does yourself and your background play in how you influence other people?
Great. So when you talk about the staircase, that is a skill to apply to your ability to influence, but you bring a whole bunch of stuff forward before you apply that skill. So if you were to look at your influence, I could divide and picture a pie, 4 pieces in that pie. And let's look at the first piece of your influence. It's your endowments. So it's what you're born with. So there's a certain element of influence that is innate, that comes from within. So you can't change your age as much as we try. We can't change our age or our intelligence or our appearance. Those things are the endowments that can affect your influence. Also, you could be born with wealth and fame, which could make you influential without having any of the other skills. So think of people like Paris Hilton, for example.
Yes.
She might have a certain element of influence because of her endowments, but maybe not so many other pieces of that pie. So if we go over one, so that's the first piece of the pie. The other piece of the pie is your achievements. So these are things that you've worked on that create your ability to influence. So your degrees, your authorship, your development of a business.
Sure.
So you can think of people like Oprah Winfrey, who have incredible achievement and therefore great influence. So your achievement, these are things that take a long time to produce your achievement. Then the third piece of that pie are your character. That is things like your energy, your attitude, your trustworthiness, things that we make decisions about every minute of every day.
Yes.
And then finally are your skills. And that's where the 5 steps of the behavior staircase come in, as well as your ability to communicate, ask questions, set goals. All those things you combine. So it's a big piece. So it's not just knowing the 5 steps of the staircase.
It's the other 3 as well.
Yeah.
So you know something, you've described a pie where we've got it broken down into 4 pieces. Are they all equal? Can a lack of one be mitigated by more of another?
Yeah, well, there's one that's really the most important piece, and that is for influencing behavior. That is the foundation of influence, which is trust. So that goes to that character piece. So, and you'll see it in the elections. The thing that each candidate tries to do is to make you question. To question the other guy's integrity, his intentions, trying to get rid of that trust, because without trust, there's no influence. So that is the foundation, the most important piece.
So how do you build that trust? I know, with influence, right? But seriously, how do you build that trust with people at the core? Yeah,
well, and that starts with the decisions you make each and every day about what you say, what you do, how you act and behave. So, you know, I'll give people a questionnaire that they can fill out, like, do you admit when you make a mistake? Are you someplace on time when you say you will be? Do you talk about people behind their backs? You know, all these sorts of things that people observe. there's a great story in one of my favorite books, Influencer, The Power to Change Anything. And he talks about sitting in a business meeting and seeing a secretary come to the door to take the person away that he was meeting with. And she said to him, we made a mistake. He could overhear this. She was explaining to her boss, we made a mistake. We're supposed to ship something to this client. They're furious it wasn't there. And the boss said to her, tell them we shipped it and then go and quickly do it. Tell them it's in the mail.
Whoops.
Right. So the person in that room that was about to work on a deal with this person immediately went, I'm out of here. Right. So it's the little things that we do every day, and every minute of the day you have an opportunity to choose where you're going to stand on that factor. And people around you, whether you're in front of your customer or not, it gets back. So that is a big, huge bedrock of influence.
Which is the most important of those 4 factors, though?
Well, that's from the character. So I would say without that, you can't have the others. That I would say would be the most important, that trustworthiness piece.
How does somebody, sometimes it happens, whether it's a political contest where, there's the hate campaigns, etc. Sometimes it's somebody's made a bona fide mistake that has eroded trust.
Yeah.
How do people get that back? Is that a very slow road, or is it, once it's gone, it's gone?
Well, I think that it can also be a huge opportunity. It's like if you've ever been in a restaurant and they make a really bad mistake and then they handle it really well, and they give you a coupon, the manager comes out, you end up trusting that restaurant even more in the end. And the same thing has happened in pharma, for example. I don't know if you remember back with the tampering of Tylenol.
Oh, what a classic case. Very, very well handled.
Right. See? Handled well, and so they continue to prosper and do well. So, yeah, you can make mistakes and do even better afterwards. It's what you do with that mistake. And a mistake is an opportunity, right?
Sure it is. Sure it is. How about when you're actually trying to influence people of different cultures who've got different expectations with respect to trust, or different expectations with respect to, or histories with respect to how they make the decisions? Their staircase may be different than yours.
Right. I would say that there would be different ways of approaching and interacting with them. As we know, there's many different comfort levels. Even eye contact is different from culture to culture. But beneath that, I would say there's still the same idea of what we're trying to do is increase people's confidence and importance. So if you think about any decision, any time that you've changed behavior from childhood on, think about anything that you have just tried to do. Maybe you are just switching over I'm recently switching over from my laptop to an Apple. There's 2 questions I ask myself, no matter what culture, no matter where I'm from, 2 questions I ask myself. Can I do it? And is it worth it? So that leads to my confidence and my importance. So you're always trying to increase confidence and importance moving up that staircase, regardless of cultural difference. How you do that might be different.
Okay.
As far as the icon, things like that might change because of the culture you're dealing with.
But it's important to understand the differences in the culture. Otherwise, you'll be sending the wrong signals.
You could offend somebody. That's right.
Sure, of course. How about different personal styles? Some people are extroverted, introverted. Some people are drivers. Some people are amiable.
Yeah.
These are very different personal styles. And what impact does that have on your ability to influence? Are there some certain things, for example, that drivers or extroverts should watch out for example, and vice versa?
Right. So the key thing for an influencer is to mimic the person they're trying to influence. And there are so many courses, dozens, and by different names, whether you do colors, whether you learn what your color is and how to identify people's colors, different scores that you can identify those things to help yourself know this is what I am and how to identify what other people are. And that will help you meet their needs.
So one of the things you're saying, though, is that it's not a question of what color you are or what personality type you are, but really your ability to be flexible and transcend your natural style.
Right. Funny thing about influence is it's not so much about who I am and what I'm saying in that moment. It's me understanding who you are and what your needs are. So me understanding what color you are in that example and trying to match that. Or me identifying where you are in that staircase of behavior change and then trying to meet you on that step.
So fine, I'm an influence expert. Let's just say, how do I know when I'm not being effective with a particular person in a sales situation or an audience, if I'm speaking to them or some sort of smaller presentation? How do I know? What are some of the red flags, if you will, that we can share with our viewers on gee, things are not working out so well, we better rewind and go some other route.
Yeah, great. And that often, the first indication is that body language. And we see it as a speaker, you can picture the audiences, right? They're not looking at you, you're not getting the eye contact. Same with one-on-one. So, and so often people will continue with their sales message, even though the person is looking away or nodding in an insincere way, or trying to move back, but they continue because they think, I have to get my message out. And that's the worst thing you can do. Amateur speakers will do that too. They'll see that they've lost the audience, they're tired, it's been a long day, but they've got 10 minutes left and they'll just plow through to get through their information without reading the body language. And there's simple things you can do too by asking. There's 2 questions that you can ask your audience.
Let's hear.
Whether it's one person or many, you can ask them back to those variables. You'd ask them, how important is this to you, this new behavior that you're trying to teach them? On a scale of 1 to 10, for example, how important is it for you to quit smoking? Okay, so then I'll hear the answer and I'll know, well, I don't have to start at the bottom of the staircase. Let's say you said it was 8, it's really important. Well, I'm not going to start at the bottom of the staircase with all the it can cause your heart attack and all that stuff. I'm going to move forward. Then I could ask you, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that you can do it? And then when I hear the answer to that, I'll again know where to go. So by finding out more about you, where you sit, I can cater what I'm doing so I don't make that mistake and mismatch what I say with what you need. Because at some point, it's going to be right for me to say, you should wear the patch for this many weeks, this is the gum, do acupuncture. When you're on the initiating step, you can do that, right?
So let's cascade down to the doctor. The doctor's in the office. The doctor's scheduled to see another patient every 8 minutes or whatever it happens to be, 3 minutes.
Right.
Is there enough time in these interactions to actually make a significant difference to health care of the patient?
Great question. So can you get up that staircase in that short time? The goal of the interaction is to get the doctor to lean in. So instead of jumping up the step to go to your message, rather find out where the doctor is. You might have found that out on the previous call, for example, or maybe they attended an educational session, a CME as we call it, and you heard them talk about something so you know where they are. But to get them to lean in. So the more interesting and engaging you can be, the more time that you'll get. And that is by asking questions, bringing interesting facts forward, and walking them up the staircase.
Okay, so
giving them what they need.
But let's go one step further. The doctor, the rep's long gone.
Yep.
The doctor, on the other hand, is got that smoker in their office,
yep,
or a particular patient. They need to change their behavior. But
yeah,
that appointment with the patient is only 3 minutes or 5 minutes, right, or whatever. My real question is, can our health system actually go up the staircase? Can that doctor go up that staircase with the patient, or are we structured such that it's a losing proposition?
Well, it might not necessarily be the doctor for the future of our healthcare system, right?
Well,
it might be someone, a healthcare professional or a team approach to influencing that patient. Each role has what they do best, and the counseling piece might not be best with the doctor, right? But they need to include that, because handing over a script, you have a 1 in 2 chance that the patient will follow it consistently for a long period of time.
Is that what the stats are? Only half of the people follow?
50 to 75% of patients don't necessarily adhere, depending on the disease state and the drug type, especially when the disease is asymptomatic.
Okay.
So this is a huge cost to our healthcare. So we need to get better at teaching healthcare professionals how to influence patients. It was only a couple of generations ago that doctors simply said what needed to be done, and patients followed it, and now it doesn't happen.
It wasn't too long ago, thank you, when doctors actually did house calls too.
Right.
So it's a different regime nowadays. Yeah. So general practitioner, family practitioners sitting in their office, they've got perhaps a receptionist, maybe they've got a nurse of some sort who's assisting, maybe not, but they've got their day scheduled from morning to night.
Right.
It just seems very difficult, as much as we might use terms such as team approach.
Right.
It just doesn't seem to me that we're really in a position to properly influence patient behavior if we're structured such that the majority of doctors aren't in team environments and they are the 3 to 5 minute period of time, and here's your script, and
right,
come back tomorrow.
It can be frustrating, absolutely. And you'll be pleased to know that we are moving, and it's a big wheel to turn, but we are moving in that direction. For example, pharma is moving. We're in this pharma 3.0 phase, and we're moving into a more integrated approach. So it's not just here's a product that will alleviate these symptoms, but here's a product that alleviate these symptoms, and with that is a toll-free number, and with that is this patient education tool, and it's a whole system.
Continuum.
Because we realize it's not just about a drug. It's a whole package that has to go with it. So this is happening more and more, and that's how pharma can contribute to these better healthcare outcomes too.
Very, very interesting. We're talking right now with Jill Donahue of Accelerate. We're learning about influence, but I think we're going to talk a little bit more about the pharma industry in our next segment. Come back, we'll learn a little bit more. We're back on Professionally Speaking TV. I'm Randall Craig, your host, with Jill Donahue. Jill, we've been talking before about influence, and obviously the context has been the healthcare system, but you spend your entire career in pharma.
Mm-hmm.
Big, bad pharma. The industry's got a bad rap.
It does.
Why is that?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the industry that's been responsible for so many of the health advances throughout the years.
Yeah.
So why the reputation?
It wasn't always that way. There was a time Fortune magazine listed the most admirable company 8 years in a row running as Merck. And then that was Pharma 1.0, we call it. And then about the year 2000, things started to change. And from 2001 to 2008, for example, the shareholder value of the top 15 pharma companies decreased. And I don't know if you can even imagine this number. It decreased by $850 billion worldwide.
Wow.
So that graph that was going up so nicely started going down in the year 2000.
And why is this?
Things started changing. And in response, it was harder to get drugs on formulary. Safety factors became increasingly more difficult. Now the government doesn't want to fund drugs unless they are innovative drugs. But as you likely can imagine, to get an innovative drug, you need a lot of drugs that are small incremental changes. So take, for example, the BlackBerry that may be in your pocket.
Yes.
Back in 1999, that BlackBerry would show you 7 lines of text.
Very different now.
Email, but you couldn't phone. Now it's completely different. But think about the variations up to your current BlackBerry. There are journalists that would argue whether the Torch 2 was any better than the Torch 1, for example. So if you take out those incremental innovations, it's hard to get the breakthrough innovations. And so that's what's been happening lately. We're having a hard time getting our molecules to market. They're not getting funded. So there's this pressure, and also we're facing a patent cliff, we call it. Within the next year, 20% of the products will be going off patent.
Which means they can be genericized.
Right, so that means there's no money coming in for the research and development. So what pharma did in response was they thought, well, the old model, the sales rep model worked, let's throw more sales reps at it.
Mm-hmm.
And so while we doubled our investment over 5 years, our productivity shrank by half. So that wasn't working. And so that's where I come in with what I'm teaching now, is to say there is another way.
But 1 second, go back to the big bad pharma. Sales practices, third world countries, there's all kinds of stuff that, funny testing issues, research that wasn't exactly right.
Yeah.
All these things are examples of the lack of trust,
right,
or the loss of public trust.
Yeah.
The valuation changes weren't just because of revenues going down, but it spoke to that factor that you talked about before. So how does the industry regain the trust as an industry, not as an individual rep, for example?
Well, I think it might start with the individual rep. You're right that the trust, and if people have seen Love and Other Drugs out there, a popular movie that is just a few months released, I guess, it shows US, big pharma at its worst. And that was an era that we went through, that I think that's when they were trying desperately to regain back the success they had been enjoying. And it didn't work.
The economic success.
Yeah, the economic success, exactly. And so all these strategies, they relied heavily on reciprocity as an influence strategy.
Okay.
But that just doesn't work.
When you say reciprocity is an influence strategy, what do you mean by that precisely?
So I will, in Love and Other Drugs, I will party with you, you will use my drug. That's what they demonstrated there, right? I'll buy you this, you'll do this for me. It doesn't work, and it's short-lived. I'll take you to the finest restaurant in town, you'll prescribe my drug. It's short-lived and it doesn't work in the long run. So that practice has stopped, and we have self-monitored that. our industry has set some guidelines down that we are self-monitoring that. In any industry, there's going to be some negatives.
Sure.
The thing about the farm industry, when you're at a cocktail party and you say that you work in the farm industry, rarely do people talk about the life-saving benefits or the fact that I wouldn't be alive today. My uncle died of appendicitis, which I, of course, just had a simple operation and survived. My husband wouldn't be alive because he's on inhaler. My daughter would have a terrible quality of life because she's on antihistamines. We don't talk about that, the incredible benefits that our industry brings to people, the wonderful things that we're doing for charities and contributing to society in third world countries. What people come up with, rather, are the negatives.
One of the differences between Canada and the United States is in the United States they allow direct-to-consumer advertising.
They do.
But here in Canada, we don't seem to have that.
We have the crossover that naturally comes over,
Sure.
but we have different regulations for sure. We have some good things going on in Canada too. Our continuing health education is known worldwide as being very above the other areas. So that's the discipline of teaching physicians how, in a continuing health education, teaching physicians how to treat patients. We do that really, really well up here.
The whole issue of direct-to-consumer advertising, though, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because if I take a look at it and I think, well, gee, should the doctor be influenced by the pull from the patient or not?
Right. Well, that pull from the patient, that's becoming more and more a factor as patients become more and more educated. And being your own advocate is really, really important. So I think whether it's good or not, we can't avoid it. For our healthcare system to survive, patients need to, well, not to survive, but for it to be healthy, we need to look after for ourselves. We need to be educated ourselves. The more educated you are, the less medical error that will happen, because there's an incredible amount of medical error out there. So if you are educated yourself and keep asking the right questions and pushing that, that will prevent those errors.
Interesting. You mentioned charity that the industry does. You actually have distinguished yourself by actually starting a charity. Tell us about it, Bricks and Books.
Bricks and Books. I love to chat about Bricks and Books.
Sure. What is it?
So it is the pharma leadership event with a heart, we call it.
Okay.
So we have a day once a year in October where we bring in great speakers to teach us, and we donate 100% of the money to build a school in the developing world. So we just had our visit to our school that we built in Nepal last month. A few volunteers went over to do the opening ceremony and were greeted with flowers and tears, and it was a wonderful experience for them to go and see our work in action. Hundreds of people come together for Bricks and Books, and it's a wonderful day of learning and developing new ideas.
Why
for ourselves.
did you decide to do that?
So about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I was asked to be a speaker at an event that a friend of mine was doing to raise money for Room to Read. John Woods leaving Microsoft to change the world. He started
Yes.
Room to Read. And of course, I volunteered my time to go to this event. It was great. It wasn't my target audience. It wasn't necessarily for pharma or healthcare professionals, but I went and talked about influence. It was a wonderful day. And then a few weeks later, we had a tragedy in our family, and my nephew was killed. And I realized, and I knew that the best way is to look at other people and focus on others. And so I thought, well, that event was so great. What if we could duplicate that and help hundreds of children and do so in the pharma community? So I just took that skeleton that my friend had already set up and duplicated it within the pharma. I called a couple of friends and said, what do you think? Does this sound like a good idea? And you know the old saying, they told two friends and so on and so on. And sure enough, now we have this incredibly successful event.
How much do you raise each year?
Last year we raised $40,000, and because we donated at a certain time, there was an anonymous donor who was doubling it, so ended up being an $80,000 contribution.
Wow.
Yeah, so we're just thrilled.
That goes very far in Nepal.
It really does. And so we're going to build another school this October.
Why Nepal?
We went through Room to Read.
Yes.
And they had a number of places that they had a need for a school, and that was just a choice.
So it's amazing. You do this kind of thing and make a dramatic difference to the kids over there. How's the charity changed you?
I don't know if it's changed me. It makes me feel very satisfied. You always want to feel like you're making a difference. And when my daughter, you know, watches on TV some of the commercials and says, you know, why aren't we doing anything? I can say, well, we are. We are doing something. And I think it's really important that we teach our children that it's up to each of us individually to do our share.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, you've obviously had a certain success in your personal career. Has there been one person that's made a significant difference? Maybe a mentor who's given you some special advice. Who was that person? What was that advice?
What a great question. Well, if you look at, there's different aspects of my career, but if you look at my speaking career, I'd have to say Dave Chilton, a friend of mine who's been very successful with his book, The Wealthy Barber, and he has a Wealthy Barber Returns coming out. And he has given me so many tidbits of information from, in the early days, things like just read everything you can, was one of the things that stuck with me, which I've followed. And his example of storytelling. His book sold
Sure.
2.5 million copies, the biggest book ever, best-selling book ever. And I asked him why, and he said it was because he told a story. So I followed that advice in my book and changed what could have been a very academic, dry book for pharma into a story about a pharma rep turned manager, and people are loving it. They're eating it up, the book that I wrote for Pharma Associates.
Wonderful, wonderful. When you give a presentation, some of them are great, some of them are not so, but there's always one that's more memorable than any other. What was it?
I think the most memorable one was my first one, because it's when I discovered, that's when the penny dropped for me. When a person I knew, I was still working for pharma, she asked me if I would come and speak to her group, and I asked my boss, and she said yes, it wasn't a conflict, and I went and spoke with her group, and I had goosebumps the whole time. And the penny dropped. I remember going back to my husband saying, I can't believe I just got paid for that. I just loved it. I've got to do more of this. And that's when I really transitioned my career from working for pharma to going out on my own to do this. So I'd say that's my most memorable.
Wonderful. We're with Jill Donahue. For more information on Jill and all of the stuff that she's doing, the charity, certainly Accelerate, certainly Prescription RX, you can go to her website, which is accelerate.ca, and that is spelled EXCELLERATE.ca. There's all kinds of neat stuff there, a bunch of quizzes and surveys and everything like that. So great place to be. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Pleasure.
It's Randall Craig on Professionally Speaking TV. We've got all of our past episodes on our website, professionallyspeakingtv.com. And if you want to make a difference, first you've got to do it professionally. See you next week.